Welcome to Newsmax TV. I'm Kathleen Walter. With us now from Washington is Representative Steve King, Republican from Iowa, and a member of the House Committees on Agriculture, Small Business, and the Judiciary. And Representative King, it's good to have you back.
It's good to be back. Thank you, Kathleen.
Well, tomorrow the House GOP will hold a special conference on immigration. It's a closed-door strategy session, which you forced with enough signatures from your fellow lawmakers. Can you talk about the special conference and what you hope it accomplishes?
Well, this has been wired, I think, from the beginning to move something through the Senate and the House that would be characterized as comprehensive immigration reform, with the motive of taking immigration off the table and perhaps picking up a greater percentage of the Hispanic vote. That seems to be the motive. And I hope we get to this tomorrow in the special conference in such a way that members are in a position where they have to articulate their positions and they'll listen to others' positions. It's this. If you legalize people that are here illegally, that means that it is a path to citizenship. Eventually, those folks that are rewarded with the objective of their crime will be voting. They will have the measure of citizenship. And we can get to that piece. Maybe we can understand then as a group that there's nothing in this for Republicans, independents, Americans. It isn't good for the American people. The only people that are in America that are beneficiaries of such a policy would be elitists, political power brokering Democrats, and those who hire illegals. Other than that, there's nothing in it for Americans. There's no reason for us to do this, and we have no obligation, no moral obligation to, let's say, bring people out of the shadows. They came here to live in the shadows. I suggest we enforce the law we have and otherwise let them have what they came here for, which is to live in the shadows.
Now, some have questioned whether this special conference is a challenge to Speaker Boehner. Are you satisfied with how the GOP leadership is handling immigration reform? And are you satisfied also with the assurances that Speaker Boehner has given you that he will not break the Hastert Rule?
I would do things a little bit differently than leadership is strategizing on this now. And I've heard Speaker Boehner talk about the Hastert Rule, and he said he will not bring an immigration bill to the floor that essentially violates the Hastert Rule. He's talked to the subject of neither an amendment or a conference report under the same standard, but that has not been clear enough to me. And so when I read through the text of his statement, I think that can be more solid. And so I would handle it differently, but this isn't a leadership issue so much as calling for a special conference. We're going to talk about immigration, and I want to get the immigration issue resolved. I'd like to take it off the table, and I'd like to see leadership make a statement that we're not going to legalize people that are here illegally. We're going to take up the important business of the American people, and a lot of that is oversight over this Obama administration that refuses to enforce the law. That's where I think we need to go. And if this gets diverted into some kind of struggle, if somebody is wanting to emerge in I'll say in a different position leadership-wise, it would be outside the scope of what I'm doing. I want to restore the rule of law, and I don't want to grant amnesty.
Now, the House Judiciary Committee, of which you are a member, has adopted a piecemeal approach to immigration reform, approving a series of bills without the path to citizenship that the president and Democrats are seeking. Do you believe that this is the legislative path that the majority of Republican lawmakers in the House can support?
I don't think it's a good idea to bring immigration legislation to the floor, for the reason that if it comes to the floor, it'll be brought to the floor with the votes to pass it.
You don't even think the piecemeal approach should go to the floor?
Correct. And I say that because any vehicle that we send over to the Senate is potentially a conferenceable bill. And if we send over, it's a pretty good interior enforcement bill that passed out of the House Judiciary Committee that empowers local government and local law enforcement to enforce immigration law, among other things. If we send that over to the Senate, Harry Reid can just put a little bit of language in there that guts it or actually strike it all out, put in the Senate's Gang of Eight amnesty bill and send it back to us, or insist on a conference. There's no reason for us to be vulnerable in this on losing the rule of law over the idea that because the Senate's never going to pass anything that fails to legalize people that have broken the law. The president's not going to sign anything that doesn't give him his political objective. And the president won't enforce the law. So we cannot do business with a president who will not honor his own oath of office. And that doesn't mean that I suggest that the work that came out of the Judiciary Committee is all bad. No, there's some good stuff in there. E-Verify mandatory is pretty much a good bill. Yes, I'd like to make it better, but it's pretty much a good bill. The Interior Enforcement is pretty much a good bill. The president's not going to enforce the law. He's made that clear, even with Obamacare. The bill with his own name on it and his own signature on it, he's decided he can amend his own bill by simply sending a memo out, posting it on a website of the U.S. Treasurer. That's appalling to me from a constitutional perspective, and I can't do business with a man who is no more trustworthy than that.
So are you saying then that we should table the entire idea, the whole idea of immigration reform until, say, there's another administration in office? And if that's what you're saying, what do we do then with the 11 million people or more who are here illegally?
Congress does not have an obligation to resolve the issue of the 11 to 33 million people who are here illegally. They came here on their own. They came here to live in the shadows. There's no moral calling for us to solve the problem that they created for themselves. They can easily solve it by just returning to the country where they can live legally. So I don't know what this poll is about resolving this problem, and I don't know why. Otherwise, reasonable Republicans can tell us that the only way that we're going to get law enforcement is to legalize all the people that are here illegally. I ask them, who would you enforce the law against after you grant amnesty to everybody that's here? And the idea that those who came here illegally to live in the shadows need to be brought out. Why? What's the benefit? Those who are convicted felons, those who have committed the 3 mysterious misdemeanors, those who might not qualify, the very people that they say they need to keep track of are not going to show up to register, and they're not going to go out and find them. They're not going to go out there and deport them unless they stumble across them with local law enforcement. And that's happening. It should be happening now with our felons at a minimum.
Representative King, a number of Republican groups have come out in support of the Senate immigration legislation, including Grover Norquist's Americans for Tax Reform, Karl Rove's American Crossroads, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, and other groups. And yet the conservative House, as we know, is very much against it. Former Florida Governor Jeb Bush and former President George W. Bush are urging Republicans to move forward on this issue. Why do you think that this issue has divided Republicans as it has?
Well, I think you have to look at the categories that I mentioned. Who are the beneficiaries of this amnesty policy? Elitists, Democrat power brokers, and those who hire illegals. The folks that you listed there, I would ask them if they fit into any of those categories. I suspect that many of them do. Karl Rove has been working to implement an amnesty plan since George Bush's 2000 election. And I remember a map of South Texas in the 2000 election that shows a whole mass of counties in South Texas where one would presume it had the highest Hispanic concentration. They went for Al Gore. So when a popular governor of Texas has trouble carrying the southern counties in Texas in his election, that caught the attention of President Bush and Karl Rove, and they devised a plan which was going to be the outreach to the Hispanic community. And that speech was delivered by President Bush on January 7th, 2004. That's when they began to implement this outreach, and they called it comprehensive immigration reform. We're still on that, they're still beating that same old drum, but today, Republicans understand that that's a loser for Republicans, it's a loser for the rule of law, it's a loser for the economy, it's a loser for America. And yet they insist that the reason that Mitt Romney is not president of the United States today is because he said 2 words, self-deport. I suggest instead it was because Democrats spent millions of dollars calling Republicans racist, and whatever race or ethnicity people might be, they don't want to be pandered to, and they understand that they're members of the human race and that we have all God-given rights, and we need to provide equal opportunity without regard to race, ethnicity, or national origin, but with regard to whether or not they abide by the law.
Representative King, while we have you, we'd like to get your quick take on just a couple other stories making headlines today. The House this week will take up the 5-year, $500 billion farm bill. There's talk it might be split into 2. What is your position on this legislation?
Well, right now, there's a strong effort on the part of leadership. They did a whip check a little bit ago, and we'll see what the numbers are. If they bring a bill to the floor tomorrow or the next day, it'll be splitting the farm bill. And I think it's a mistake to do that. The only time we have an opportunity to reform the nutrition title in the bill, that's the food stamp title, or the SNAP program is it's now named. The only time we have an opportunity to do that is when we reauthorize the Farm Bill. And if they split those two, and we pass a Farm Bill, which is about 21 or so percent of the overall resources in the bill, over to the Senate, separate from a nutrition or a food stamp bill, whatever we put in it for cuts in food stamps, and billions of dollars need to be cut from the food stamp side of this thing, whatever we do, Harry Reid will look at that and he'll have a couple options. One of them is just to take the farm piece of the bill, pass it off the Senate and send it to the President. Another one would be to amend the farm piece of the bill and send it back to us. But I will tell you, he will not take up the nutrition bill. He will let that set because that spending goes on in perpetuity. It does not sunset, and it grows by a programmatic formula according to the demand. And today, we have Secretary of Agriculture Tom Vilsack spending millions of dollars and hiring people to go out and promote more signups to food stamps. When I first memorized the number, it was 19 million people on food stamps. Today, it's knocking on the door of 48 million people on food stamps, and they're pushing it further because they want to, and they've already created a dependency class in America. They want to expand the dependency class in America. It is a cynical political move on the part of the administration, and we would be giving up that ability to reform the food stamp side if we separate the two. But if it comes to the floor, I have said, I'm not going to say to agriculture that you aren't going to get any kind of a bill. I think that Frank Lucas, the chairman of the committee, has done a tremendous job of trying to hold this all together, and we need to get some kind of predictability to agriculture. So I'm likely to vote for a bill, even if it's split, although I disagree. I don't think it's the right kind of strategy.
Last question for you, Representative King, is on Egypt. The White House says it will not suspend aid to Egypt for now. What do you make of the president's decision here? And should we stop sending aid to Egypt, as Senators John McCain and Rand Paul say?
Well, it looks to me as the White House supported the Muslim Brotherhood when they won an election in Egypt, and I don't know whether that has been what we'd call a legitimate election or not. And now they seem to be stuck with wanting to stick with the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt. It's hard for me to look at what happened, though, in Egypt and not call it a coup. The federal statute says no resources to a government that took power by way of a coup. It looks to me also that whose side do you want to be on, the side of the Muslim Brotherhood or the people that deposed an elected government in Egypt? This question isn't as hard yet in Egypt as it is in Syria, but we've got about 5 different entities that are fighting in Syria against Assad, and I don't know if there are any good guys in the whole mix over there. That may be what emerges here in Egypt as well. So for now, I would suspend the aid to Egypt. We don't know who's going to get that aid. And I'd want to go back down on the ground and find out, and from the people that are actually on the ground, what's going on, what are the political movements that are made. I'm getting stuff that's coming out of Benghazi as recently as yesterday that's new information to me. This administration has not been forthcoming. And so it's hard to work with them on foreign policy if they're going to tell us that our ambassador was just randomly killed because of a video that was produced in Hollywood. The movies like that are produced in Hollywood, but we're living it in real life today.
All right, Representative Steve King, Republican from Iowa. Good to see you, and thanks for being with us.
Good to see you, Kathleen. Thank you.
And thank you for watching Newsmax TV.